Hi, I'm CM Williams, a video strategist and digital marketing consultant, and this is video 1 of a 5-part video series where I teach you how to use your camera. So I'm naming this series Automatic to Manual, or A to M for short. Just ignore the fact that there is actually an A setting, but even still, it kind of still works. As long as you're on manual, and on manual, you're comfortable using your camera and experimenting with your camera. So who's this series for? Well, this series is for anybody who went out and got a professional camera or a prosumer camera for the quality, of course, opened it up, saw the bells and whistles, didn't know what the f, so they put it on automatic so they can get the best quality they could with the best of their ability. And that sometimes results in kind of having to leave it in the bag, sit it around, or leave it in automatic until a magical camera tutor fairy comes along. I'm here to help you out though. After you watch this video series, you will no longer need to do that. Here are a few things we're going to learn between the first and the third video. How to purchase the right SD card, shutter speed, aperture, frame rate, and ISO. All those terms will be defined in detail during this series. So go find your camera, plug it up, charge it, because next week it'd be nice for you to have your camera in your hand while I go over what we're gonna go over. But I'm not gonna leave you hanging until next week. We'll at least start with what each of the settings do on that dial. And in between videos, I'll be going more in depth on these topics on Instagram, so come join the party. Thanks for helping Daddy with his vlog.
You're welcome.
You are doing cartwheels. All right, so you're gonna stand right here for me. This is my daughter. She's gonna, oh my God. A spider web out of my face. That's funny to you, huh?
Yeah.
That's fair. We'll start with automatic settings. And pretty much whenever you have your camera pointed at something, the automatic settings decides what settings are best for you for what it thinks you're trying to take a picture of. P stands for program mode, and it's an auto exposure setting where it'll choose the shutter speed and aperture for you. You can typically tweak those settings after the fact. The A, or on some cameras, AV, is aperture priority. This setting basically allows you to make the background of a subject as blurry or as not blurry as you like. Then the camera will decide the other settings that's best for you. The S is for shutter priority, and basically it lets you prioritize how much motion blur you want or don't want, and then it chooses the other settings for you. Lastly is M. M stands for manual, and that's where you choose every setting, and it's the setting that's most familiar with professional videographers. Unless they're in any number of unconventional situations where you're okay with the camera picking your settings. If you're recording anything in HD, which is basically everything now, you'll want at least a Class 10 SD card. And just in case you're not sure what an SD card is, it is the camera's memory card. So you'll need this to actually have your camera hold and store any footage and photos you get. And depending on the camera you have, you may actually need a certain SD card. So let's go over that. Alright, so this is the manual for the Sony a7 III. SD card, in case you didn't know, fun fact, stands for Secure Digital Memory Card. What this is telling me is that if I want to record in either HD or in 4K, I'm going to need at least a Class 10 SD card. Which most SD cards will say, because that means it has a minimum write speed of 10 megabytes per second. You'll also see classes 6, 4, and 2, and each of those just mean that they write at their minimum corresponding megabytes per second. If you're shooting in 4K, I recommend a card with at least 95 megabytes per second. For 1080, which is full HD, at least 80 megabytes per second. It's honestly pretty hard to find a Class 10 card that writes much slower than those speeds. Anything slower should be used for audio or documents. And if I want to crank it up and shoot in 4K 100 megabits per second, meaning that the camera is going to write even more information, that's your bit rate. You're going to have higher quality footage if you shoot at the highest megabits per second your camera can shoot in. You're going to need a card that also has at least an ultra high speed class of 3. So with the Sony a7 III, you definitely need a Class 10 SD card with a U3 on it. And what you'll also see on your card is something like V6, V10, V30, V60, V90, and you're gonna want to get at least a V30. a V90 if you can. And what those are your video speed classes that the SD card association created. The size of the SD cards you want to purchase is up to you in a way. You'll kind of get a common sense about how much space you'll want to buy whenever you get some shoot time in, because obviously the bigger you go, the more expensive they get. But how much are you shooting? Do you need a lot of space? With me, I don't have cards much lower than 64 gigs. I have a couple that are 32 and a couple that are 8, and those typically get put inside of my 8.6 zoom recorder. And then most of them honestly are 128 gigs with 170 megabytes per second write speed. So that's the majority of my SD card wallet. But I do know videographers that will only use smaller cards to lower the risk of losing footage. So if one card gets corrupted, they didn't lose 128 gigs worth of footage. Which, with that said, I'm just good about backing my footage up after every shoot into at least 2 different places. So I don't really have that issue. So if you decide to get a giant SD card, just make that a part of your workflow. Just wire yourself basically to back up your footage after you shoot, rather than shoot and then sit down. Seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of not backing your footage up right away. I'll tell you a few stories at some point when I live stream. But alright, get those cameras charged, run to Best Buy, go to Amazon.com, order you an SD card, because next week you'll want your camera in your hand for episode 2 of the A2M series. Consider this the intro to the series. We'll be back on Sunday, and like I said, in the meantime, come join us on Instagram where I'll be talking about these topics more in depth. Until next time.
Five, four, three, two.